I underwent a complicated knee surgery, and instead of support, I received silence. Literally. The whole house was empty. They went on vacation, leaving me on crutches in the basement. Without food. I underwent a complicated knee surgery, full ligament reconstruction. Something I had been putting off for far too long, convincing myself I could keep pushing through the pain until I couldn't anymore. The procedure went well according to the doctors, but the recovery was no joke. I was told I'd need at least 2 weeks of absolutely no weight bearing, stuck on crutches and mostly horizontal, with physical therapy to follow for months after. It wasn't the kind of thing you could tough out alone in a 1-bedroom apartment up 3 flights of stairs, so I packed up the essentials and moved into the basement of my parents' house in Utah. That was 18 months ago. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I could walk again without feeling like my knee was made of splintered glass and surgical tape. I didn't realize how much more complicated that temporary stay would become. I work in IT fully remote with a stable salary and the kind of job that would easily allow me to live on my own if I wanted to. But when I was staring down the reality of recovering from major knee surgery, it seemed more logical, and honestly more comforting, to be close to family during the long rehabilitation. My parents, Jack and Susan, live on the main floor of the house, the same house I grew up in with its creaky wooden steps and the smell of coffee always lingering in the kitchen. My brother Mark and his wife Lauren live just a few blocks away, but they're in and out of the house so often that it sometimes feels like they live there too. They come by for dinner, to drop something off, to help my dad with yard work, or just to sit around the living room and talk. At first, it felt nice, like I was surrounded by a support system that made everything easier. I thought I was doing the right thing, practical, smart, grounded in family, but I had no idea how quickly that sense of security would begin to unravel. We clearly talked about everything in advance, long before the surgery date was even scheduled. I sat down with my parents and with Mark and Lauren, laid everything out as honestly as I could, and explained that for at least the first few weeks after surgery, I wouldn't be able to cook for myself, drive anywhere, or even move around without help. It wasn't a dramatic request. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page, that everyone understood what the recovery would realistically look like. Everyone agreed without hesitation. My dad nodded in his quiet, dependable way, my mom squeezed my hand and told me not to worry, and Mark, with that easy grin of his, said, "Of course, brother. We're here." Lauren chimed in enthusiastically, even going so far as to say she'd prep some casseroles and freeze them ahead of time so I'd have something comforting and warm to eat without needing to lift a finger. At the time, it felt like we were a team, like I was walking into this long healing process with people who cared and were willing to carry a little of the weight for me. I believed them. I really did. On the day of the surgery, everything went as planned, at least medically. The operation was long, but the doctors were confident, and I was too groggy from anesthesia to worry much about anything else. My dad, Jack, was the one who picked me up from the clinic. He didn't say much during the drive, but his quiet presence was steady and familiar, the way it always had been. When we got back to the house, he helped me out of the car with careful hands, guided me down the steps to the basement, and made sure I was settled on the couch where I'd be sleeping for the next few weeks. He brought me a bottle of water, set my medications on the side table, checked that I had a blanket, and then, without ceremony, went back upstairs. I barely registered the sound of the door closing because the anesthesia was still heavy in my system, and within minutes I was fast asleep, unaware that the hardest part wasn't the surgery itself, but everything that would follow in the days after. The next morning I woke up in absolute silence, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. My knee throbbed with a dull, deep ache, and my throat was dry from the pain meds, but more than anything, I needed ice. I picked up my phone and sent a message to the family group chat, something simple like, "Hey, could someone bring me some ice when they get a chance?" I waited, staring at the screen, expecting the little typing bubbles to pop up. Nothing. No reply. Not even a read receipt. An hour passed. Then 2. By lunchtime, the pain had crept higher, and the silence was getting harder to ignore. I forced myself onto the crutches, every movement stiff and slow, and made my way up the basement stairs, one shaky step at a time. When I finally reached the top, I found the house completely empty. No one in the kitchen, no one in the living room, no note, no text. Just the faint ticking of the wall clock and a near-empty refrigerator that held little more than a half-used bottle of ketchup and a carton of eggs. There was no casserole from Lauren, no sign that anyone had prepared for the recovery we had all discussed. It felt like walking into a stage set that had been abandoned mid-scene. I opened Instagram, more out of boredom and frustration than anything else, hoping to distract myself from the throbbing pain in my leg and the growing sense of confusion in my chest. As I scrolled through stories, I stopped cold when I saw Lauren's name at the top of the screen. I tapped it, and there it was, a cozy, perfectly filtered video of her, Mark, and my parents sitting around a crackling fireplace in a mountain cabin, mugs of cocoa in their hands, smiles all around. My mom was wrapped in one of her favorite knitted shawls, my dad was laughing at something just out of frame, and Mark was leaning into Lauren like they didn't have a care in the world. Across the bottom of the screen was the caption, "Family Escape. We needed it." My finger hovered over the screen, motionless, as the reality settled over me like ice water. They had left. The day after my surgery. No note, no call, no message, not even a half-hearted check-in. Just gone, like my recovery wasn't even a factor in their plans. They had chosen peace and cocoa and mountain air over staying behind to help the person they promised they'd be there for. And I was left in an empty house with an empty fridge and a knee I could barely move. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at that Instagram story, the cheerful glow of the fireplace still burned into my mind, before finally opening the family group chat and typing out a message with trembling fingers. "Have you forgotten that I had surgery yesterday? I'm here alone, I can barely move." I stared at the screen for a few more minutes after hitting send, half expecting someone to respond immediately with concern or even embarrassment. But the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, and the silence on my phone only deepened the knot in my chest. When it finally did ring, it was Mark. I picked up with a lump in my throat, expecting at the very least a half-hearted apology, some acknowledgement that they had made a mistake. But instead, his voice was sharp and defensive from the start. He didn't say sorry. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He accused me of being selfish, of guilt-tripping them while they were trying to get some much-needed rest. He said I was being dramatic, that I was an adult and should be able to manage on my own, and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I sat there in stunned silence, holding the phone to my ear while he continued, realizing that whatever version of family I thought we were, it wasn't this. The following days were hard in a way I hadn't truly prepared for. Without any help and with the pain from the surgery radiating through my entire leg, even the smallest movement felt like a punishment. I only went upstairs when it was absolutely necessary, when I needed water, or when the ache of hunger finally outweighed the effort it took to climb the stairs on crutches. I started ordering delivery thinking I could manage that much, but the moment the driver left the packages at the front door, I realized I couldn't carry them down to the basement. I tried once, dragging a small bag awkwardly behind me, nearly falling in the process, and gave up after that. The basement slowly turned into a mess. Wrappers, empty water bottles, used medical supplies, and garbage I couldn't carry out started piling up around me like quiet proof of how forgotten I really was. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that someone would check in, that maybe they would come back early or realize what they'd done. But the truth was impossible to ignore. I had been abandoned. Not by accident, not by circumstance, but by choice. At some point, maybe out of frustration or maybe just to keep myself from unraveling, I opened the notebook app on my phone and started writing down everything I do for this family, not just the big things but the small, constant, thankless ones that add up over time. I typed out how I pay for the family Netflix account every month without anyone asking, how I cover the Spotify plan so everyone can listen without ads, how I'm the one who set up and maintains the banking apps on their phones because they can't remember their passwords or figure out how to transfer money. I wrote down how I fix the internet every time it goes out, crawl behind the router or reset the network because no one else wants to deal with it, how I mow the lawn when my dad's back is acting up, how I was the one who repaired the garage door last fall when it jammed halfway open and refused to budge. I remembered all the times I've written letters to insurance companies for them, carefully wording complaints or appeals because they say I'm good with that kind of thing. Line by line, the list grew longer, and with every item, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was the slow, steady realization that I had been giving and giving, without ever asking for much in return, and the second I needed even the bare minimum, they vanished. I realized, sitting there with my phone in my hand and that long list of unacknowledged tasks staring back at me, that I didn't actually live with my family, I worked for them. I was their free round-the-clock tech support, lawn care, handyman, financial advisor, and digital assistant, and none of it had ever been framed as a favor. It was expected, automatic, part of the quiet agreement I hadn't even realized I'd signed. And the moment I stopped being useful, when I wasn't able to carry groceries, fix the Wi-Fi, or explain how to reset a password, they vanished. It wasn't a misunderstanding, no matter how much I tried to rationalize it or give them the benefit of the doubt. It was a conscious choice. They had weighed my value in terms of what I could offer and decided that, temporarily, I wasn't worth the effort. That realization hit harder than the surgery ever could. A week later, after endless silence and a slow, suffocating buildup of resentment, the only message I received came from Susan's mom, a short and almost robotic text that read, "Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you need anything." There was no mention of the absence, no acknowledgement of the fact that they had all left me alone to recover in a basement like I didn't even exist. I stared at the message for a long time but didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. By then, I had already taken action, not out of spite but out of clarity. I opened every app and account tied to their comfort. The streaming services, the shared subscriptions, the automatic payments I had been managing behind the scenes for years, and one by one I shut them down. I canceled the Netflix plan, removed my card from Spotify, deleted my payment information from the shared phone plan, and stopped every auto payment that had quietly run through my accounts month after month. It was oddly freeing, like I was slowly untangling myself from a web I didn't realize I had been caught in. If they didn't want to show up for me, then they could learn to live without the things I had been silently giving. When they returned, there was no knock on my door, no footsteps on the stairs, no voice calling out to check if I was okay. No one asked how my knee was doing, whether I had enough food, or how I had managed alone for over a week. The silence from their end wasn't just cold, it was calculated, like I had simply been put on pause. The first message I received was from Mark, and it wasn't an apology or even a greeting. It was a blunt complaint: "The code to the warehouse doesn't work. I need tires." No, hey, no, "How are you holding up?" Just a demand, like I was a vending machine that had stopped functioning properly. My mom didn't text or call. She left a note at the top of the stairs, scribbled on a piece of scrap paper and taped to the railing. "Internet is down. Look at it when you can." That was it. No acknowledgement of the surgery, the pain, the complete abandonment. It was as if none of it had ever happened, as if I hadn't spent the last 10 days isolated, injured, and slowly unraveling in the basement. They had returned to their lives, and in their eyes, I was simply expected to resume mine. Invisible, reliable, and useful. I didn't fix anything else. I read their messages, saw the notes, heard the confusion upstairs as they tried to piece together what was wrong, but I stayed quiet. And then, slowly, the panic began to settle in. Lauren couldn't get into the library app and sent 3 increasingly frantic messages, asking if I had changed something. My dad wandered into the basement doorway one afternoon, asking vaguely about the Wi-Fi, his tone casual but strained, like he didn't want to admit he couldn't figure it out on his own. The house began to unravel in the quietest, most inconvenient ways. The printer wouldn't connect. The smart TV froze on the home screen. Mark couldn't reset the garage keypad. Every little thing that used to just work was now breaking around them like clockwork, and none of them knew what to do with it. For the first time, they were staring at the daily details of their own lives and realizing how many of them had depended on someone they had ignored the moment he needed help. The silence I gave them in return was deliberate. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. And they didn't know what to do with that either. On Tuesday, without warning, Mark burst into the basement like a storm, his voice already raised before I could even register what was happening. He stood there in the doorway, red-faced and furious, yelling that I had ruined everything, that the house was falling apart and no one could get anything done, that I had created this mess by being petty and ungrateful. I let him speak, let the words crash over me like static, and then, as calmly as I could manage, I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not tech support anymore. If I'm a stranger to you, then don't expect me to behave like family." My voice didn't shake. I didn't raise it. I just told him the truth, the kind that had been sitting in my chest for far too long. He stared at me for a second like he couldn't believe I'd said it out loud, then turned without another word. The door slammed shut behind him, loud and final, and in the silence that followed, I felt something shift. It wasn't power. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just clarity, and it was mine. My friend Jason is coming to see me today, and honestly, he's the only one who hasn't abandoned me through all of this. He checked in after the surgery, brought food when he could, sent dumb memes just to make me laugh, and reminded me, without ever saying it outright, that I still mattered to someone. As I sit here waiting for him, I've already started to gather my things, folding clothes, unplugging my laptop, mentally sorting through the pieces of my life that I'm taking with me. I'm leaving here. Not just the basement, but the version of myself that believed I owed these people my time, my energy, my patience, no matter how little I received in return. With each step of my recovery, every time I climb those stairs on my own or manage something I couldn't do the day before, I feel it more clearly. I am less and less a part of this house, of their expectations, of their silence. And more I am a part of myself. Oh, tired, yes, but finally mine.